Hey macro students, all right, we have module 74 here. I hope you all can hear me okay. It's kind of loud here in my house. I got my husband on a meeting in the next room and my son is, he does this thing where on his iPad, they do a video conference on Zoom and then on this computer they play a game called Roblox. And so they get kind of loud, so we're gonna do our best here. All right, so, you know, it's just how this pandemic life goes, isn't it? All right, so here we have monetary policy and the interest rate. So last module we discussed just sort of monetary policy in general and how the Fed can actually increase or decrease the money supply. And now we're going to figure out how does increasing or decreasing the money supply impact the economy? Like, why do they even bother to do such a thing? All right, so let's go through this. We've got another one of these like big lengthy book definitions, so let's figure out what that is. Oh, but first, our essential question: why and how does monetary policy impact the aggregate demand curve and therefore the real GDP and the unemployment rate? Ooh, that's exciting stuff. All right, so the Fed can use monetary policy to impact the interest rate and therefore impact the aggregate demand curve and therefore stabilize the economy. Like, this is like the whole summary of this entire like unit, really. Unit 5 is really about like, holy cow, the Fed can use monetary policy to change that money supply and therefore change that interest rate and therefore try to fix our whole economy. Like, that's amazing. So, okay, so monetary policy, that just means changing the money supply, increasing or decreasing the money supply. Changing the money supply. And then to impact the interest rate, remember the interest rate is the price of a loan. And, we talk a lot about these interest rates, these loans, because they can really impact the economy. If a person or a business is taking out a loan, they are going to spend that money, which is going to have a huge impact on our economy when they're spending that money. So that's why it's kind of a big deal. All right, and therefore impact the aggregate demand curve. So that AD curve, it can shift left or right. And then remember, when the AD curve shifts left or right, it'll impact the real GDP and it'll impact the unemployment rate. So shift left or right, and then therefore real real GDP can change and the unemployment rate. All right. And then therefore stabilize the economy. So stabilize the economy, that means to get out of a recessionary gap or an inflationary gap. Get out of recessionary or inflationary gap. All right, so a little bit of review from our last module. The Fed can change the money supply in 3 different ways. Just a reminder, they can change the required reserve ratio. Change the required reserve ratio. They can make it go up or down. Remember, if the required reserve ratio goes up, the banks have to hang on to more of that money. They can't loan out as much of that money. So therefore, the money supply goes down. Okay, and then the opposite of that is true. If the required reserve ratio goes down, the money supply goes up. All right, number 2 tool is that they can change the discount rate. And the discount rate is the interest rate that the Federal Reserve charges to a bank. So if a bank needs a loan, they can go to another bank for a loan, or they can go to the Federal Reserve. So if the discount rate goes below the federal funds rate, the interest rate that banks charge each other, then banks get loans from the Fed and money supply goes up. And then number 3 is open market operations. And just a little reminder of what that means. So that's the sale and purchases of treasuries. So we'll go sale of treasuries. And so if the Federal Reserve is selling a treasury, the bank gets the treasury, and the Federal Reserve gets the money, which means that the money supply goes down. And then purchase of treasuries. That means then that the Fed gets the piece of paper, the treasury, and they give out the money so that to the bank. So that means that the money supply goes up. Okay, so that's a little review of those tools. Alrighty. Pro tip, if the teacher makes you write it down twice, it's probably important. All right, page 2. Okay, so here we have, it says, how does changing the money supply change the interest rate? All right, so if you're like watching the news or something and they're talking about the Fed, they don't say on the news, the Federal Reserve increased the money supply. What they say on the news is they say the Federal Reserve increased or decreased the interest rate. But that's not exactly what they do. What they do is they will change the money supply, and that changes the interest rates. So let's talk for a moment about the money market. So we have a market for money, and there is a demand for money. So that'd be D subscript M, the demand for money. And then we have a supply of money, but the supply of money is a vertical line. Supply of money is a vertical line. The price is the interest rate. And then we have the quantity of money down here. So we skipped over the module that described why the demand for money is a downward sloping line and why the supply of money is vertical. So just accept that they are. If you really want to know why, go back to module 73. And so what we can see is that if the Fed were to increase the supply of money, that would be a rightward shift. So supply of money 2. And at our first money supply, our interest rate was here. And now at our second supply of money, our interest rate is now lower. So what the Fed wants to do is they want to impact interest rates. Because remember, they're using monetary policy to help fix the economy out of an inflationary or a recessionary gap. And what they can do then is change the supply of money, which therefore changes the interest rate, which therefore impacts if people want to take out loans or not, right? So when the interest rate went down, the quantity of loans that they wanted to take out went up. So we could say if the supply of money goes up, how did I want to say that? If the supply of money goes up, then interest rates go down. Okay. And if interest rates go down, more people want to take out loans. All right, so why is the money supply a vertical line? I guess we are going to go over this for a second. It's just that if it's a vertical line, it means that the supply of money is not impacted by the interest rate. So the quantity supplied of money is not impacted, meaning it does not change if the interest rate changed. It's not impacted by a change in the interest rate. And there's a good reason for that. The supply of money comes from the Fed. The Fed can just poof, create money out of thin air. So it's not impacted by the interest rate. In fact, the supply of money impacts the interest rate. The interest rate does not impact the supply of money because the Fed decides what the supply of money is going to be and they create that, and they do that to therefore manipulate or change the interest rate. All right, so here we have what happens when the Fed increases the money supply. So let's take a look at that. We're going to graph it out again. Oh, we actually just did that up there. So, I guess we can just write it again so you have it clearly in your notes. So supply of money 1, and then supply of money 2, right? That increase is a rightward shift. Demand for money, and you might want to, write in that means demand for money. Interest rate, our quantity. And so if supply of money goes up, therefore interest rates go down. And then if it decreases the money supply, well, let's graph that out. So you have your demand for money, supply for money 1, and then a decrease is a leftward shift. Supply of money 2, interest rates, you can see they started there and went up there. So if the supply of money goes down, comma, interest rates go up. Okay, and now here is a little summary of what I was saying before. The Fed does not directly control interest rates, right? The banks that are giving out the loans, the lenders, they decide what they're going to sell their money at. They decide what the interest rate is. The Fed can't tell them you have to use this interest rate, but the Fed can influence where that equilibrium price lands by changing that supply of money. So it says here, the Fed does not directly control interest rates. They can only influence interest rates by changing the money supply. Money supply, supply of money, same thing. If the interest rate is 4% and the Fed wants it to be, this says 5%, they will decrease the money supply. Okay, page 3. All right, so why would they want to change the interest rate though? What's in it for them? Remember, they're trying to fix a gap, right? So they're going to use that interest rate to try to fix that recessionary or inflationary gap. So monetary policy, using the money supply to help achieve an economic goal. So meaning to get the economy out of a gap. All right, so how does changing the money supply and therefore the interest rate help the economy? Let's start first with expansionary monetary policy. It tries to expand or make the economy bigger. So if it's trying to make the economy, bigger, then it must be used during a recessionary gap. Okay, so we tell the story of how this monetary policy eventually impacts the economy using these 3 graphs. So this first graph is the money market. So that is the supply of money. So you've got your money supply, you've got your demand for money, and here is that interest rate for money. And it's starting there. And what they're going to do in a recessionary gap is they're going to increase the supply of money. So you would have your supply of money 2 to the right, and then you would have a new interest rate, and you can see that that new interest rate would be below the old interest rate. So what this is saying is that the money supply or supply of money went up, and therefore interest rates went down. We've gone over that a couple times now. All right, so now here we have our loanable funds market, right? Our market for loans, meaning like who wants to buy or get those loans, and then who wants to sell or lend those loans. And we really only need to do the demand for loanable funds, which is a downward sloping line. And then here we have interest rates. And then here we have our quantity of loanable funds. And at our first interest rate here, so you can just go across at our first interest rate, the quantity demanded of loanable funds was here. And then our interest rate went down, and now we have a new quantity demanded of loanable funds that increased. So we can see here the interest rates went down, so therefore the quantity demanded of loanable funds went up. So that's quantity demanded of loanable funds. You might want to write that in. Quantity demanded of loanable funds went up. All right, so quantity demanded of loanable funds going up means that more people want loans, right? More people are willing to take out loans to buy houses and cars, and more businesses are willing to take out loans to make their businesses bigger. Well, here, this graph is the economy. Well, we know that we're going to draw our economy in a recessionary gap. So go ahead and do that. Draw the economy in a recessionary gap. So that means that the economy in short run equilibrium is to the left of the long run aggregate supply curve. So that's where the economy is, and here we have price level, and here we have output or real GDP. All right, so we know here it says that the quantity demanded of loanable funds goes up. Well, and then I said, well, that means like more people are going to go out and buy houses and cars with loans, and businesses are going to go and expand their businesses. They're going to take out their loans and do stuff. Well, what I just described when I'm saying more people will buy houses and cars with loans because the interest rates are lower and the loans are cheaper, what that means is that consumption will go up. And then also when I said that businesses will go out and take loans to expand their businesses, that means that investment will also go up. Well, if consumption goes up and investment goes up, well, what does that mean? That means that aggregate demand goes up. Okay, so there it is. Aggregate demand increases. So now we can see that our aggregate demand has increased and brought our economy back to long-run equilibrium. And so the consequences then, the end result is that, as we can see, our price level did go up, so the price level went up. Real GDP went from there to there, so real GDP went up. And if real GDP goes up, that means that the unemployment rate goes down, right? So like, that's great. See how they're using monetary policy to get the economy out of a recessionary gap. So kind of our end result here, they're saying that if the money supply increases, sorry, my handwriting, then the unemployment rate can go down, which is awesome. Okay, so I'm writing the word can here. The unemployment rate can go down because if the interest rate goes down, but it doesn't inspire more people to take out loans and more businesses to take out loans, this will be unsuccessful. And we do see that sometime where they do increase the money supply and the interest rate does go down, but people are like, I'm not taking out a loan. I don't care how cheap it is. Like, even at 1%, like $100,000 is $100,000 and I still have to pay that back. And if I think the economy's terrible and I'm worried about everything, I'm not taking out a loan, right? So like if people are in that mindset where they're like, really concerned about the economy and they don't have faith that it's going to get any better, then lowering the interest rate isn't going to help. but sometimes it does. All right, so now on page 4, we're going to do the same thing, but this time with contractionary monetary policy. So, all right, so it tries to contract, or to contract means, oh, my computer's doing something weird, hold on. So there we go. So to contract means to make smaller, so to like shrink the economy. So, and it's used during an inflationary gap. All right, so what I challenge you guys to do right now is I challenge you to do this on your own using what we just did for expansionary monetary policy, but everything is going to go backwards. So I challenge you to pause the video here and give it a try on your own and then replay it and see if you did it right. Are you pausing the video? All right, now that you paused the video, let's see how you did. So we start with our graph of the money market. And we are going to show that there's the demand for money, and there's the supply of money, and there's the interest rate, and there's our equilibrium point, so there's our interest rate. And here we have our quantity of money. And in an inflationary gap, the Fed will decrease the money supply, so it'll make that leftward shift, which then, as you can see, increases the interest rate. So here we see that the money supply goes down, therefore the interest rates go up. All right, well, how does the interest rates go up play out in our loanable funds market? If you think I'm going too fast, did you pause and try it on your own? All right, so our loanable funds market, we have our demand for loanable funds, and here we have our interest rate, and we can just use our interest rates, just bring them over, so the interest rate started there, which means that that quantity demanded of loanable funds was there, and then the interest rate went up to here, which means that our quantity demanded of loanable funds now decreased. So money supply goes down, therefore interest rates go up, therefore quantity demanded of loanable funds goes down. All right, well, that means then that consumption goes down and investment goes down, and that means that therefore aggregate demand goes down. Well, we know that we're in an inflationary gap when we're drawing our chart of the economy. So we draw our economy in an inflationary gap to begin with. And an inflationary gap means that our short-run equilibrium is to the right of our long-run aggregate supply curve. Oh man, how many people were thinking that you never wanted to see this graph again after last unit? Well, it's back. All right, and then so here is our first equilibrium point. Here's our price level and our real GDP. And then we need to draw in the aggregate demand curve decreasing, or that leftward shift. Aggregate demand 2. So now we are back at long run equilibrium. But the results are that the price level has decreased and that real GDP has decreased. Real GDP has decreased, and therefore the unemployment rate has gone up. All right, so what this means is that if the money supply goes down, therefore the unemployment rate can go up and price level can go down. So why would they ever want to make the unemployment rate go up? Well, what they're more concerned about with this type of monetary policy is this right here. So that means that the money supply going down can be used to fix high inflation. So if our economy is experiencing high inflation, the Federal Reserve can get involved and they can use that. Okay. All right, so we're almost done here. Last page, goals of monetary policy. 1, to get the economy out of a gap, to like tame that business cycle, right? Our business cycle goes up and down and up and down. Well, both fiscal policy and monetary policy are trying to like make it a little bit more of a gentle ride. All right, and then number two, to keep the price levels stable, to control inflation. Now, and the Fed is often debating or deciding between those two goals, right? Like we just learned on the last page that in order to control inflation, to bring that price level down, that increases the unemployment rate. Like, oh my gosh, those are really hard choices to make. And so they can actually create a recession in order to reduce inflation. But they sometimes the Fed will view high inflation as even a bigger problem than high unemployment. And those are some really hard choices to make. But it is the job of the Fed to make sure that inflation does not run off. High unemployment rate is a big problem, but high inflation rate is also a big problem, and we don't want either one of them. So they are trying to balance out those two problems and do what's best for the whole economy. There are some parts of the book that you are not tested on. So these three parts of the readings, you don't need to worry about those. And don't forget your summary, and I will see you soon. Bye, guys.